So I'm here today at the beautiful house and gardens at Borde Hill. I'm here as a member of the Garden Media Guild, and I'm hoping to show you around the gardens and a little bit of the history to this beautiful house and land. For me, there is nothing better than a wonderful day out in nature and especially in some beautiful gardens. There's so much to see and do, so it really can be a day out for the whole family. Now, Borde Hill is located here in Sussex. The nearest station is over at Haywards Heath, and you can either drive or from Haywards Heath you can just do a half an hour walk to get here to Borde Hill. I've been really excited to learn today that actually they've got some amazing plans for the gardens here, and part of that includes its accessibility. So one of the plans they have here is that they're going to be developing new pathways and walkways for people to be able to access the gardens much easier from places like Haywards Heath train station. As I drove in this morning, I was blown away by driving underneath this incredible viaduct. So I was really surprised to hear that one of the previous owners here had actually wanted to cover it up with trees and planting. But I don't know if you can see behind me, the view is just absolutely incredible. I'm so lucky to be here at this time of year, because just look at the size of some of these beautiful camellia blooms. Gorgeous. So this part of the garden that I'm standing in now is known as the Garden of Allah. Now, this garden is intended to bring peace and rest whilst in it, and it really does do that. And it's worth noting to come here because there are 3 champion magnolias in this garden alone. These 3 champion magnolias were brought over to Borde Hill in the 1930s, mainly coming from Japan and China. People often think about magnolias being semi-large trees that will be in your gardens, but this is one of the champion magnolias here in Allah's garden. It is absolutely massive, hence why it is a champion tree. But what's really interesting is that this variety is only going to flower after it has all its leaves on it. So really unusual for a magnolia. The tree behind me is another very special tree, one out of 70 of the champion trees here at Borde Hill. This tree is particularly special. This is a tulip tree because this tree is the first tulip tree to flower outside of China, flowering here at Borde Hill for the first time in 1927. Now, it's not on flower at the moment, but you'll be sure that I will be coming back to see it when it is. The family here at Borde Hill have always been really proud to sponsor plant hunters. But with that brings a whole new challenge. When you're bringing in a plant from abroad and growing it here in the UK for the first time, it brings a whole another dimension to the right plant in the right place. Not only are you having to discover what this plant likes in its own homeland, but also have a look at what it's going to like here in the UK. Borde Hill has been under the care of the same family for almost 130 years. I was privileged enough to meet some of them as I was going around the garden today. Not only have they maintained this beautiful garden, but they now also have one of the largest collections of privately owned rare trees in the whole of Britain. As you leave the Garden of Allah, you can take a grassy track down into Warren Wood, and beyond that, into Stephanie's Glade. These woods are absolutely beautiful all year round, with tree-sized rhododendrons creating a beautiful confetti along the floor, to bluebells and wild garlic scenting the air. As you walk up the slight incline from Allah's garden towards the house, you'll come across the Long Dell. Now, the Long Dell is actually an old Victorian quarry, and this was where many of the plant hunter introductions were planted in the 1920s and 1930s. It was thought that where the dell dips down, it created a little bit of extra protection for some of the plants. However, the hurricane in 1987 caused a lot of damage to this area. Whilst many of the original rhododendrons that were planted by the plant hunters have now gone, you do still have some incredible plants that really do make you feel like you're on a Chinese mountainside rather than in West Sussex. When the family bought Borde Hill House in 1893, they also acquired a small holding with this pigsty, cowshed and chicken sheds. Now, they used these as potting sheds. However, they fell into a state of disrepair from the 1970s. However, this thin soil from the old potting sheds really suits this wide range of hardy perennials that you can see throughout this part of the garden. Now, this part of the garden here at Borde Hill has been designed with the history of the family and the heritage of this gorgeous garden in mind. The idea is that the narrowing of the garden towards the waterfall here demonstrates how those plant hunters would have on the front of their boats made their way into the beautiful forest and tropical lands to discover some of the plants that are now here in the garden. area behind me is the Italian garden, and it's got perfectly mirrored plants, which you're going to hear more from the current owner onto how they've designed this beautiful Italian garden.
What makes it the Italian garden is obviously the lily pond itself, central sculpture, the terracing at the far end, the topiary around the edges, and the symmetrical planting, and also the choice of colours. You don't want to have yellows in an Italian garden, for example. So we did our research, as you do, and go on holiday to Italy. Of course, you've got to have an excuse, which was we're looking at Italian gardens. And came back, and my wife and I decided to do the plantings that you now see. The background of the mature pines over there used to go all the way around the corner, as I said before, to the edge of the Dell, but the 87 storm got rid of them, so they're no longer there. But that was part of the boundary. Remember, Stevie put in plantings to delineate the edge of the parkland. We saw the plantings for the pinetum just in front of the viaduct. The other ones looking in that direction are the edge of the parkland over there, so you've got cedars and other evergreen trees. But he did it also on a small scale. So here, for the edge of this area, he wanted to delineate the edge of this area. For him, each of the little rooms, they didn't use the phrase garden rooms, but he wanted to make sure that they had an identity of their own. And then, of course, we've got the eucalyptus, which has grown over the years to be taking over that job of being one of the edge boundary markers of the area. You could decide that you're in Florence or Rome just by looking at this little area. Lovely sunny day like this, why not? We've got here the Magnolia stellata that is intentionally planted to mirror the Prunus taihaki. Cherry Ingram, in the early part of the 1900s, went over to Japan and found a tree, a cherry tree, that they said was extinct or nearly extinct, because this, in quotes, was the only one they had left. And he said to them, well, why aren't you propagating it? And they said, well, we've tried, but it hasn't worked. So he said, well, if you give me some cuttings and seeds or whatever you've got, I'll take them back to England and I will then try propagating it in England. And this was one of the first seedlings that he then created, that was then planted here. Of course, taihaki now exists in quite a lot of other places too. But a lovely balance, part of the design of what we've got. So part of the planting design of the edges is a sequential set of plantings that over the season, over the year, will give interest and colour. The same is true of these terracotta pots, and you can see what we've done is we've got pots that perfectly fit the plastic bucket thing, and so you can take the old bucket out, put a new one in, and change the colour as they cycle through. And so we start with tulips, then we have agapanthus, and then pelargoniums, and each year we decide to put in other things to try them as part of the cycle then goes on. In there we put some black dye. That's just to improve the reflection, so that you get better photography when they've got nice still water. It's plant and creature friendly, so you've got your water boatmen and your newts and things happily living in there. No fish, not because we didn't put them in there, but because the heron comes along and whips them out. At that end we've got the steps going up the rill. I added a rill because I wanted to make a little bit more movement in the water, so there's just a pump that pumps it round. And we've got a statue at the top. So a girl standing there, she's greeting the morning or greeting the dawn. She was originally standing there, about to dive in that direction. We decided that it wasn't appropriate for you to be walking up the steps into the Italian garden. You'd be looking straight at a naked woman's bottom. We've just to the left of the steps got the Discaria discolor. This is a champion tree from Chile, quite a gnarled, odd-looking tree, but we're very delighted that it's very happy living there. And behind that, on the Italian terrace, the Magnolias and Magnolia K Paris, a relatively recent addition. One of the advantages is that you can happily prune them to the shape you want. We haven't done that yet, but they are in need of a prune to shape.
The Italian garden here is absolutely captivating. You can't help but just spend time sitting, enjoying, relaxing and taking it all in. And it was an absolute pleasure to hear about the history of this beautiful garden from the wonderful owners. As I left the Italian garden and came down towards the South Park, I was met by Paradise Walk. Paradise Walk is 263-foot long border, which has been very challenging to plant. However, in 2020, Chris Beardshaw came to redesign this part of the garden. He selected different perennials for colour and scent, and it really does last now all the way from spring to late autumn. There's lots of bee attractors in the garden and in the planting, and the palette is mostly of soft blues, lilacs, creams and pale yellows. This part of the garden really does show what you can do when you have challenging soil conditions. One side of this garden has a very clay-like soil that bakes dry in the summer, whilst the other side is a very thin soil, which is really great for drought-tolerant Mediterranean plants. An article from Country Life in 1902 read, "The East Garden, with its rose arch, has a radiant vista through a realm of floral loveliness. There are roses clustering on arches and walls, exhaling their fragrance in the sun." After reading this, Andrew, John and Eleni, who had taken over Borde Hill, were determined to recreate the rose garden here. It had been lost several decades before they took over the gardens. However, they have built this J. Robbins Rose Garden, named after their daughter, bringing back that floral loveliness into the gardens here. Lifting her bouquet of roses up towards the sky, this beautiful copper statue of Aphrodite stands tall in the middle of the rose garden and was one of my favourite features. When leaving J. Robbins Rose Garden, you'll pass through this beautiful archway into the Mediterranean Garden and Victorian Greenhouses. Although this area was really damaged by the hurricane in 1987, it used to be the powerhouse of Borde Hill. Borde Hill's 25 or so gardeners would have spent much of their working lives here, caring for peach, apricot and fig trees. One of the greenhouses has also been listed as holding one of the orchid collections. In 1949, it was listed as having over 450 species and cultivars. The gardeners would have been busy propagating, grafting and crossing plants introduced from overseas. Although this area is no longer the beating heart of Borde Hill, it is still absolutely beautiful to come and see the history of this absolutely beautiful garden. I have had a wonderful time here at Borde Hill today and can't wait to come back and see this garden at different times of the year, as there'll be interest all year round. If you've enjoyed this video, please do click subscribe, and thank you for watching.